My name is Junichi Hibino from Radio FMYY in Japan. FMYY is the community radio station in Kobe. I and my colleague, Mr. Imam Prakoso, he is the Vice President, the World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters, Asian Pacific, make presentation here. So we would like to explain the role of the community radio in disaster management, because a community radio is very important tool for communication with community. At first, I would like to introduce what is community radio. The community radio is called, in other words, humanitarian radio. A community-based radio, independent media, and also the community media for the voice of voiceless. Right now, so there are more than 10,000 community radio running all over the world. So from this slide, I would like to explain the practice of the community radio in disaster management. The first practice is the experience in the Philippines, Typhoon Haiyan. When the typhoon hit the central Philippines, the very huge information vacuum came up in the affected area. Despite so many media covered there, it means the affected people couldn't receive important information from mass media because the mass media, they tend to disseminate the information to the outside, not to inside. Instead, the emergency radio, which our colleagues set up, they played a very integral role to disseminate the information to the affected area there. Next practice from Japan. 4 years ago, the East Japan great earthquake and tsunami occurred around the coastal area of East Japan. Immediately after the disaster, around 30 emergency radio stations were set up by local government in collaboration with community group. Definitely, these radio stations disseminate the very important information to the affected people. Since then, 4 years passed. This is the map of, this is map of the affected area in Tohoku region. Still, 11 emergency radio stations are running. This radio station bridged among the people who are isolated, and also they are promoting the dialogue among the different stakeholders. It means emergency radio turn into rehabilitation radio to regain the people's feeling to carry on living. From next, I hand over the microphone to my colleague, Imam Prakoso.
Thank you, Hibino-san. Yeah, I would like to explain the case of Indonesia. Actually, if we're talking about the community radio, then we're talking about the small-scale area coverage of community radio. It is different with the public radio or private radio. Community radio, as Hibino-san mentioned, is a community-based radio. So we will show that in the process of participation of the community. In the case of Indonesia, I would like to explain about the one very active volcano in Central Java in Indonesia. We call it Merapi Volcano. Surround slope Merapi, there is 8 community radio stations. So, as I mentioned, that community radio is a community-based radio, which means that we ensure that the participation from the community in affected, the potential affected area also has main player in this case. So, for the knowledge of developing knowledge of DRR, community radio have a main role to various community group using local culture. So not only broadcasting the information or the knowledge of DRR, but also use radio to interact among people, to understand about the DRR based on the local cultures. Even as Hibino-san mentioned, there is more than 10,000 community radios around the world. But if we're talking about the disasters response, there is still many challenges for the community radio to running out. First, only a few countries have a conducive environment to develop community radio or emergency radio. If talking about conducive environment means regulations and also others environments. And the second one, lack of understanding from international NGOs, international agencies, governments, to include community radio or emergency radio into disaster management. Until now, we just count that only several countries using community radio to respond to disasters. Like in Haiti, maybe you still remember the earthquake in Haiti. In Japan and Indonesia, during Aceh tsunami, we facilitate the develop community radio, start from emergency response until the rehabilitation and reconstructions. Third. And the suggestions, we have to clear regulation on developing community radio or emergency radio, since there is only a few countries. I can say that only one country in the world, is it Japan, who have regulations to develop emergency radio directly after disasters. Indonesia, we have regulations about the community radio, but we don't have regulation for directly develop community radio or emergency radio after disasters. And the second one, we have to include the community radio or emergency radio capable for emergency response and also the contingency plans. So those two suggestions, because we understand and we believe that the community radio or emergency radio is one tool of community can be affected to respond disaster in the small scale area. So our suggestion is, please work with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.